Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism Midweek Special. I hope you and yours are well. Nice to see you again. Got a really special programme for you today. We've called it Free Spirits and Freeports because it's about both. I'm going to start the show slightly differently this week. I'm absolutely chuffed as, pleased as, to get the first exclusives. I have as my first guest today, Derek James Kerr, the Independent for Independence candidate for Edinburgh East at the upcoming UK general election. Derek, welcome. Nice to see you.
Hi, Roddy, and hi, Prism. Good to be on.
Great to have you here. So you declared this week to stand in the Edinburgh East seat at the UK general election. That must have been a big decision for you to take.
Yeah, it's a thing that's been in the back of my mind for an awful long time, because I had the same reservations as many people, things like splitting the vote and where do you stand and, how am I going to keep food on my own table and things like that, and all this sort of usual stuff. And then, God, people are going to be asking the questions. But to be honest, it's when you know what you want, and you know why you're doing it, and find that you're doing it for the good of the sovereign, which is a thing they'll be digging into, which is the people of Scotland. So if you're doing it for the people of Scotland, the sovereign, then you've really no excuses as to why you can't. I mean, I don't have a family around or anything like that. I'm afraid that apart from manacled to the old job as everybody else is, my evenings are actually pretty free. My weekends are pretty free. So I was actually getting to the point where I was thinking, I can't find any excuses not to do this anymore because I'd alleviate a lot of the fears. Like a lot of people would be thinking, oh, you're splitting the vote. But the actual facts are, it might have been true maybe 5 years ago or so, but even then I'm dubious on that one. But all I'm going to be doing is getting the sleeping SNP vote out. So I hope that'll alleviate a lot of people's fears because, it's absolutely legitimate. Are you going to split the vote? And at the end of the day, the answer is absolutely not.
No, you're right, because I've been pushing this point on Prism for some weeks, some months in fact, is that independence has been hovering over 50% for well over a year now, and all the polls that come out, the SNP vote's slipping and slipping and slipping, and the ALBA vote is flatlining. It's been flatlining at 2% for a long, long time. So there's about 20% of independence voters who are not enthused. So they do. But why did you choose to be an independent for independence and not go for a party label?
I was very much beginning to, over the last, ever since really the Sturgeon days, I was really beginning to lose my party, or the party was beginning to lose me as an SNP member. And ever since then, it's just been getting further and further away. You've got the GRR bill, which I don't think has really been very well handled. You've got the hate crime bill, and the biggest elephant in the room right now that we must be absolutely petrified of is Freeports that we're going to talk about, and just I'm sure.
Yeah, that's the big thing today. I'll be talking to Al, Baird and Lloyd later about Freeports. You're right, it is a big, scary thing. But there's so much going on just now. But you've also, you'll be getting involved with Indy First to assist you with your campaign.
Yes, so I'll certainly be getting involved with Indy First. I'm sure we'll all be making sure that we're all singing from a similar hymn sheet, although we are independent people, so we do have our own opinions about things, and then there'll be lots of local issues and stuff like that. But the biggest thing is that will unite us all is we need to get independence done yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think not having a party whip is an advantage?
Absolutely, because turning a big party when you've got the big whip behind you and things like that is like trying to turn an oil tanker. independence are agile. We can turn on a sixpence. We can react to whatever situation's coming along. Take the temperature of what the electorate's looking for, and then deliver.
And you've actually covered this, you're not splitting the vote. I absolutely agree that, as I say, there's a huge percentage of the independence supporters who are not going to vote. And so I think it's fantastic that there's independence for independence, because they've had their chance. I mean, the SNP in particular, they've had mandate after mandate, and they've just not used them. And the Alba Party, as I say, been banging along the bottom, and they've not caught the enthusiasm of the public either. Why do you think that is?
They've been playing cards too close to their chest. They've not been really open with their membership. And it's a real shame, because, there's a host of people within the SNP and the greater membership who are die-hard independentistas, and they have it at their heart. But I don't know whether people at the higher echelons get into into government, whether it's Westminster or Holyrood. They maybe start to lose confidence because they have to swear fealty to the crown and things like that. And then they've got the sword of Damocles over their head, treason and stuff like that. So I just wonder if they start to get a wee bit on the nervous side. And then they get into this bubble as well. So they're only talking to themselves about themselves. And they're so busy. I mean, I don't actually blame any of them for what's happening, because they're in such a bubble. But then again, if they were to put their head out, I don't know, would they change their mind? I don't know. I mean, I'm just here to do what I do, and then speculating on what's happening inside. I can only vouch for, the way I've seen it, and the way that I've had to then make my own choices because of kind of what's in front of me. But yeah, these people, I really don't believe that they're 100% behind getting independence done, expeditiously, quickly. I really don't believe it. They may be behind it eventually, but it's going to be too late by the time they eventually do whatever they're trying to do and then finally get it. I know Hamza's all really talking about going down there with a majority, and then saying, right, okay, it's time for us to negotiate the end of the union. I hope it happens. I really do hope it happens, but we don't know.
Well, actually, the last time I heard him, he was talking about getting a Section 30 again. So, I mean, what was it Einstein said, keep repeating the same things over and over again and expect the different outcomes, the first sign of insanity.
Absolutely.
I know you're going elsewhere, and we haven't got you for long, so I'd like to cram in as much as I possibly can for the viewers and particularly the people of Edinburgh East who are going to be voting for you. So you're a dad of 2 kids, and you're an engineer by trade.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it all happens, in this kitchen here. I've got the CAD station in front of me and stuff like that. So I do a bunch of cameras and stuff like that, designing a whole sort of stuff like that, and I mean, it was a Prism audience here, so there might not have been very many people that saw Spy in the Ocean, but the 2 whales, the humpback whale and sperm whale that featured in Spy in the Ocean, were designed in this very kitchen table right here, designed in Scotland by a Scotsman. It's funny how they always come running up the road every time they want something done that actually works, like a ferry or two, to 8.1% of the population.
I wouldn't mention ferries. It's not our best thing. All the aircraft carriers we built don't seem to be doing too good either. Although we didn't design them. So when you get to Westminster, what's going to be the first thing you're going to do?
Well, the first thing I'll be doing is it won't be the first thing I'm going to do. It's the first thing I'm not going to do. And that's swear fealty to the crown. So I'll not be going anywhere near the Privy Council or anything like that. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes down.
Yeah, I did see
Yeah.
Indy first sent a letter to Mr. Speaker last week suggesting that he brings in a Republican oath. Would you be comfortable swearing in a Republican oath?
I would be very comfortable signing or swearing a Republican oath, and to be and so long as it's an oath to the people, to the sovereign, and then that way they can then pull bits of legislation out their back pocket, like salvo iurequis, which means if I don't do their bidding as they see fit, as per the mandate they give me, bye bye Derek, and that's the way it should be.
Well, I agree. I think we should have a better recall system. Although it's one thing talking about it, it's the other thing getting it put in place. But the best way to do that is to get independence.
Absolutely.
That's it. And then we can put in place whatever the heck we like. Now, I'm conscious of your time issues, Derek, and I don't want to keep you too long. Is there anything you would like to say to the voters of Edinburgh East and throughout Scotland about you and your candidacy?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the most important thing is independence. But very closely behind that right now is we need to really get a good deep delve under the bonnet of Freeports. So I would suggest anyone with a Facebook account gets onto Facebook and searches Salvo Freeports, and starts to get really deep into the background of what's been going on. For instance, it was about 3 months ago, the 1st of March, there was an event held at Murrayfield Stadium. Started at 10 o'clock in the morning, went until 10 o'clock at night. It was advertised on LinkedIn, £350 a ticket. And at that event, as far as we can gather, Scotland was sold from beneath our feet. We have Freeports happening to this right now. I mean, people will be thinking, what? There's actually Freeports happening right? Yeah, there are actually Freeports happening right now up in Cromarty. Most of Edinburgh is going to be turned into a special economic zone with the actual Freeport in the middle. You know, Edinburgh Airport will be part of it and all that kind of thing. And the taxation will be extremely light touch. I believe that the actual figures are that the public will be funding this. So there'll be investment going into these Freeports and stuff, 80 million or 80 billion. And there's a whole pile of investment going into, round about Inverness, and there's a pile of investment coming into the Freeport in Edinburgh. And believe it or not, you've also got Glasgow in the mix now as well. There's a special economic zone either side of the Clyde for a good stretch of the land, and within those zones, the taxation or I should say that the investment coming in will be from the public purse. But then 90% of that is just going to go straight down a pipe, straight to the Cayman Islands. We'll be left with 10% for the United Kingdom, which means we only get 8.1% of that back. And then when you actually take that as a percentage of the whole thing, it's 0.81% that we will actually see going into the taxation coffers, which is nothing. So how after that, how are we going to fund the NHS? How are we going to fix the potholes in the roads? How are we going to get our bins emptied? Where's the investment into our society coming from all this? It's built on deregulation. So are we going to have to trust private companies so that we've got workers' rights like holiday pay, paternity pay, everything you can think of, your weekend, being able to take time off, all that kind of thing? It's then at the discretion of the companies that run these free or special economic zones. Deregulation, it is a frightening prospect. And as I say, get underneath the bonnet, go to Salvo Freeports on Facebook, have a look. You'll find a lot of information there and see what comes up. And really, it's something to get behind, and it's going to be a big part of what I do. Second second to the independence issue. We need to get that as soon as possible, and that's basically what I'm all about.
Correct. They're both interlinked. Derek, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk to you again. We'll have you on here oftener so that people can get to know you a bit more. We wish you all the luck in your campaign. We wish you all especially the luck on the Freeports. And thank you for giving us your time today. I know you're very, very busy in a tight schedule. Thanks very much, Derek. We'll speak to you soon.
You're very welcome, Roddy. Bye for now, and bye, Prism.
Well, there you go, folks. There was Derek Kerr. I hope you enjoyed that. We were lucky to get hold of him. We could only get him for 15 minutes, but we'll bring him back and we'll ask for more. But in the meantime, I've got my guests sitting outside waiting to come in. And I'll start right away. Well, I'll bring in another Edinburgh man, and that's Mr. Quinnen, who's had a little conversation with a tree today. How's your nut, mate? Oh, pound as well. You just lost a pound as well, Lloyd. You're on.
Right.
How's the nut?
It's not bleeding anymore. That's the main thing.
It gives you a nice shade in the head. Well done. Well, welcome again, my friend. Nice to see you. And of course, not forgetting should I call him Professor Al Baird, give him his Sunday title. Al, how are you?
I'm fine, Roddy. How are you?
I'm exceptionally well. Exceptional. Always nice to see you. It's always a pleasure, never a chore to see you, Al. We were, ladies and gentlemen, meant to be joined by David Powell, but those of you who follow David Powell will have seen that he's taken a wee break away. He's found the pressure of everything just a bit too much. And actually, the day after he said he would do this show, he called it off. Well, maybe it's because I said that the professor was going to be here as well. Maybe it was you, Al, that scared him away with your vast knowledge of Freeports and
well, I've spoken with David. David's a great expert on Freeports as well.
Now, I know he is. That's why we invited him on here.
Yes. Yeah.
And we just had a passionate chat there, Alf there, Derek. I don't know if you've met Derek before on the tour, on the Freeports tour.
No, but I read his statement the other day, and it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's good to know.
He's very interesting background as an engineer.
Oh yeah, you would like that. I thought
you wanted to be a surgeon, but there you go.
Yeah. There you go. Into the guts of machinery instead of people. Something else. So where are we just now with the Freeports? Is Chrometry up and running, Alf?
Well, I think there's not been very much in the news about Freeports, but I think we can safely assume that the machinery to get them moving has already taken place. The establishment of the Freeports, when I read about it, was to have boards of 12 people, one of which was from the local authority. So local authorities are not that well represented here. I don't know who would compose the board of a Freeport, but we have to go back, I think, to previous times as well. Remember that this is a Tory policy, but it follows on from previous Tory policies going back to the 80s and 90s to privatise the ports that we have. So they sold all the ports off, initially to the management, then to the stock market, then to private equity funds. So they're all offshore owned, and they're also regulated by these companies. So basically, the Tories sold our rivers. They didn't just sell the ports, they sold the rivers. So the River Forth, the Clyde and the Tay are all owned by private equity groups and administered and regulated by them as well. So that's before Freeports. So already we had something that the Scots never voted for. And this occurred at a time when Scots had made Scotland a Tory-free zone back in the early 90s after the poll tax. So we'd got rid of the Tories, but we're still getting their policies. They're selling off everything, airports, ports, utilities. And ports on the continent are regarded as utilities. So they're regarded as public utilities, strategic for the economy, strategic for defence, strategic for the environment, strategic for trade. So you can't survive without your ports. But what we've done is we've given them over to foreign entities, which no other country's done. And that's the other factor here. Britain is on its own here, not just in selling off utilities willy-nilly like there's no tomorrow, but also now making them free zones, so deregulating even more, as Derek said, deregulating them. So they're basically self-regulating entities to a large extent, and also in a tax wonderland now. And this is global money that's invested in our assets, that's sucking out the profits. Tax on ships, tax on trade, tax avoidance of trade. So the whole thing is just like making Scotland an offshore tax haven. And it's not going to grow the economy, because that's the other downside of port privatisation, is what we've not seen is investment in new ports. We've not seen investment in new ports. So we're sitting here with Victorian infrastructure at Leith docks. You know, all the docks are called Imperial Dock, Albert Dock, Victoria Dock. They're all from a different era. When I was a shipping clerk in Leith in the 70s, we tried to get modernisation then, but they refused to do it. So we're still sitting here with derelict, obsolete ports on the Clyde as well, the Tay. They're not suitable for modern shipping, modern ferries, modern cruise ships. The cruise ships can't even berth in Edinburgh. So the whole thing is we're a backward economy now being fleeced even more for what's left. And we really should be upset about this.
Yeah, but the problem is, Lloyd, is that everyone's been silent, as I've said. It's very quiet. The media are saying nothing. The government are saying nothing. The Scottish government are saying nothing. The local authorities don't have a clue what's going on. No one's saying a word.
I think this is one of the most worrying things about this, Roddy, is the fact that any statements we've had from ministers or members of the SNP who are members of Parliament for Freeport areas is that we have to look on the bright side. This is about investment. This is about bringing in jobs. And I think it's actually about them burying their heads in the sand. This is something which needs to be spoken about, and spoken about very publicly by everyone, because the danger here is that in a deindustrialized country, what little industry we have left, what little productivity we have left, will be siphoned off and through the Freeports and special economic zones. And that effectively means that we're allowing our people to be taken over by the boards of these organisations. The lack of clarity with regard to the governance, which Alfred referred to earlier, is quite extraordinary. But it appears amongst the political class, particularly, even the local councillors, no one wants to ask questions. No one wants to, engage with the public over this entire issue. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that they don't really know what's going on. But they've been told a story that this is a good thing, and therefore they're going to get on this bandwagon. In some ways, it's very reminiscent of some of the other poor pieces of legislation that we've had over the past number of years, where we have our politicians digging their heels in because they believe they are right, because they've been told that they're right. It's a very, very, very complex situation. And another thing, just following on from what Alf said, one of the first things that should have happened in the creation of the Scottish Parliament was we should have been creating a department, at least in the civil service, for maritime trade and development, the proper development of our country. Historically, our trade is maritime. A large amount of our trade is still maritime, but it's reducing and reducing and reducing, and will eventually, through the Freeports, it's my firm belief that any kind of maritime trade that benefits the Scottish economy will cease to exist, because all of the benefit from that trade will go directly to the owners of the Freeports and the special economic zones.
Yeah, here's the thing, you alluded to it earlier. Our water companies in England have all been sold off, and most of them are foreign owned. I read not so long, I think it was a few years back, but I was reading every time the King, or the Queen's it was at the time, the King decides to go on the Royal Train, the money's actually going to Germany. The Germans own the Royal Train. The Spaniards own the old SSEB in Scotland, and I don't know who else, but they're all foreign owned, the power companies. This is neoliberalism gone crazy. And it's the same here with our ports. As you said, there'll be nothing left of anything.
Yeah, well, that's right. I don't know where the SNP are in all of this, because Scotland's been sold off under their feet. It was largely sold off by the Tories before 2000, and nobody has done anything about it. I've been trying to get Scottish ministers to develop a maritime policy that's been written for them by myself and Roy Peterson. And in fact, they commissioned us to do it, and then they just stuck it on a shelf. They never did anything with it. But they never created, as Lloyd said, a maritime department out of the civil service. The problem with the civil service is, as we know, it's the UK civil service. It's not designed, it's not interested in developing Scotland. So this goes back to the colonial thesis that we're only here to serve the needs of the mother country. You know, they take all our goods, all our assets cheap, and then they sell goods back to us high. And that's the colonial relationship that we're in. That leaves us underdeveloped. Our infrastructure is underdeveloped. Our people are underdeveloped. Our trade's underdeveloped. Everything's underdeveloped. So that's the condition we're in. So therefore, we have poor infrastructure, we have poor services. We don't have the economic growth that a normal country would have, that's got control of its levers of the economy, the infrastructure, international connections. And going back to that point about internationalism, that's central to nationalism, if you like, because without nationalism, you can't internationalize anyway. But the fact is that we're still in that devolved situation, like we were before the Holyrood Parliament, when all the responsibilities that the former Scottish office had before devolution were just simply transferred into Holyrood. It's the same domestic responsibilities. So they're responsible in Scotland, the Holyrood Parliament, for domestic issues. And they intentionally and stay out of international affairs, largely, with some exceptions. You know, Hamza's recently been talking about Palestine, about things that interest him particularly, maybe as well. But the internationalism in general is not the function of Holyrood. They stay out of it, and they've not developed international connections. And this goes also to the matter of independence. We've not developed a strategy to connect with the UN, for example. Here we've got a nationalist Scottish government that could have direct permanent representation at the UN. It could have that at ministerial level. It's not done that. It's not taken our forced Brexit or disrespected mandates for other referendums to the International Court of Justice or to the Decolonisation Committee at the UN. It's not looked at the franchise, the referendum in a proper way that the UN could look. It's not brought in the UN to work with the UN. So these civil servants that we have are just driving a colonial administration, keeping Scotland as a domestic add-on to the metropolitan capital to exploit. And that's what it's doing. It's just exploiting Scotland. And there's no defence being put up by the SNP. They're just standing there. They've become a colonial administration that's part of the racket then.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, they're taking their information from the British civil servants because they don't bother to research it themselves. They just take with their hand in a paper, I think, and just read it out loud. But here's where the SNP Scottish government are meant to be protecting devolution, this next general election, and getting rid of Tories. But the other one they're trying to sell and spin is that, vote the SNP to get back into the EU. If I'm not mistaken, and if I am, I'm sure Alf will interrupt me, but you can't get back into the EU if you've got Freeports. So they're telling porkies.
I think it's another example of, and you just said it, they don't do their own research. A piece of paper is put in front of a minister or a junior minister by the civil service, and they act upon that. It's acting upon the instruction of the civil service rather than the creation of their own intelligence and their own imagination. And this is the central problem that we have of having had the same party in government for this length of time, because it's created a conveyor belt of those who were within in lower positions, most of them assistants to members of the Scottish Parliament or members of the Westminster Parliament. They have been elevated through the structures of the party simply because they're there, not because they have great imagination or they have merit and experience from business and other areas. We have a political class created from within a political class. And the bizarre thing is, we've only had this political class in Scotland for 25 years. Let's not forget, this is the 25th anniversary of the creation of the Scottish Parliament. Prior to that, we did not have this political infrastructure that has now for my money, has come to the end of its useful life. And that was perfectly outlined by nearly everything that Alf just said. All of the things we need to do to get our country back into a state where we can develop properly and allow our people to develop can only come with independence. But it also requires, it's all very well, you can change the flag, you can join the United Nations, but if you do not have a plan for the development of the economy, a proper understanding and analysis of where we geographically are positioned, where we're positioned economically, and where we're positioned in the power structures of the world. These are not issues that have been discussed within the ranks of the Scottish National Party for a great number of years. And as a result of that, we have ministers wandering around saying, this is a good thing, this is a good thing, this is a good thing, without the evidence to prove it. And at the moment, the most important thing is doing what we're doing at the moment, is exposing and talking about the potentialities for our country and the potential dangers, the very serious dangers that come to both our sovereignty and to our economic development into the future with the creation of the so-called green free ports and special economic zones, which are effectively, as Alf said, colonial plunder.
Absolutely. I mean, we had a previous programme with the three of us, and also with Councillor Brown, down in Teesside, who brought his experiences of the Teesside Freeport, which is just a absolute laissez-faire, gone crazy on steroids.
Yeah.
And the people are not, there's no, the jobs that were promised have not happened, the investment hasn't happened, but the plunder has most certainly happened. Alf, at the moment there's a big case going on, which I'm sure you're keeping your eye on, in Honduras, trying to get out of their Freeport arrangements, but they're not having much success. It's a double-barrel question. As one, will Honduras, get through, do you think? And could we, if we become independent, can we then say, well, I'm sorry, we didn't agree to these ports, we're out of here?
Well, it's up to individual states to govern themselves the way they see fit. So I think we have to take that into account. But the Honduras was, my recollection is it's a Maersk Line terminal. Maersk Copenhagen is the biggest global container operator. My PhD was on container shipping strategy and sea land, which was acquired by Maersk. So I'm aware of strategies globally that container lines pursue. Freeports, to some extent, were quite normal back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and container transshipment hubs often had freeports, but located within the container terminal. And it was goods that weren't for the domestic market. It was goods that were transshipped. That's goods coming into the port, then going into the sheds, basically, for storage, processing, repackaging, and then re-export. They weren't for the domestic market. And the idea was just to create more business for the container port. So where the container ports, or the ports in general, are serving just the domestic economy, free ports don't make any sense in that sense. And this is the problem we face. We are not a transshipment country, Scotland, or even the UK. We're not a transshipment centre for Europe. If that's Rishi Sunak's idea, he's going up the wrong path, because we're out of the EU now. That's the other aspect. I think it's also related to Brexit. This Freeport strategy by the Tories is largely a desperation state, because they know that trade's collapsed. Trade is collapsing in the UK. Imports are continuing to increase, but exports are flat and have been for a long time. The UK trade balance is not sustainable. Scotland is a different kettle of fish. We have a lot of base traffic, oil and gas, now renewables, aggregates, whiskey, of course, agriculture products, fish farms, and so on. We have a lot of goods, more than enough per capita exports to sustain the economy and to grow the economy. But the problem is all the value of these exports is extracted. It's intercepted. It's interception of economic rents, as the economists would say. So, and that's what a colony is, basically. It's fleeced, it's plundered, all the goodies are taken out. It's controlled by the metropolitan capital elsewhere, Paris, London, wherever, and that's the reality. So the empire has gone, but you've got the internal colonies, as Michael Hector called them. The Celtic periphery is still there, certainly Wales and Scotland, part of Ireland, but it's still there. So, and that's what's bankrolling a lot of London's activities, basically, and keeping its head above water. renewables, the value of renewables could be phenomenal. I mean, look at a figure for 2030 could be 60 billion worth a year. 60 billion pounds worth of renewal, and that could soon thereafter go to 100 billion or more. You know, that's a phenomenal amount of money that Scotland sees nothing of. And it was the same in oil and gas, and it still is. And certain other products, also whiskies shipped out at very low prices, and many people believe is subject to quite a lot of intercompany transfer pricing and so on. So Scots get no real benefit out of whiskey. In fact, we get very expensive whiskey.
And gin.
Yeah, and that goes back to the point I'm making. All the goods are taken out cheap and sold back to the colony at high prices, and that's what holds back our development. But the question of freeports were tried in the 70s and 80s in the UK and weren't a success at all. And that was just narrow geographic areas within ports and airports. And it didn't really work very well. And then it was all withdrawn and cancelled. But again, it's because we weren't a transshipment country. We're not Freeport Bahamas, transshipping for the Caribbean and America, or Freeport Malta, transshipping for the Mediterranean and Africa, or Freeport Dubai, transshipping for the Gulf, or Freeport Singapore, transshipping for Asia. We're not these transshipment hubs, and we're not going to be these transshipment hubs. So I think the Tories have misunderstood what freeports are. The other thing, of course, in Scotland is they've called them green freeports because they're connected to the offshore wind farms, but the offshore wind farms are going ahead anyway without freeports. So freeports are not necessary. And all the continental countries and ports that are in the supply chains for renewables in Denmark, Norway, Poland, Germany, Holland, and so on, they're not designated freeports in that supply chain the same way we are. So freeports are not necessary at all for the wind farms. They're going ahead anyway. So the whole thing's a bit of a charade, really.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. But we mentioned this on Sunday, Lloyd, about green is just a nice label to make you think it's cuddly. I mean, next thing they'll be telling you is green nuclear power will be the next one they're trying to sell us. It's a farce. It's people what Al's been talking about there. There's still a lot of people watching this show. Oh no, we're not really a colony. How do we get it through to people? Yes, actually, whether you like it or not, we're a colony of England.
I think you simply explain the relationship. You know, we are a rich country, but we appear to be a poor country. And the reason for that is because our money is taken away somewhere else, laundered, cleaned, used, and then a certain amount of our money is returned to us as pocket money in the form of the Scottish Parliament and the block grant. If we begin to explain, as has been happening over the past number of years, the colonial relationship, it is beginning to sink in with people. I mean, it goes right back to the famous old canvassing technique of the SNP in the 70s and the 80s was when you said to somebody, do you support independence? And they'd say, oh, I'm not quite sure. And I said, okay, let me put it this way. If it was an accepted practice that at the end of the week, you give the guy next door your wages and he decides what your priorities are, would that be all right with you? Well, of course it wouldn't. But that's the relationship that Scotland has with England. It's a simple analogy, but it's very, very truthful. I just want to pick up on something that you said in the intro to the question, Roddy, which is about the Greens and nuclear power, but it's more importantly about our so-called green free ports and special economic zones. The announcement yesterday that North Ayrshire, including the nuclear power station in North Ayrshire, will be in the special economic zone. The fact that we have the rotting nuclear submarines in Rosyth within the Freeport zone. All of these things are concerning, particularly with regard to the changes that will happen in health and safety procedures, which simply because, as Alpha's explained, the free ports are about making money, and anything that stands in the way of making money, like taxation, like health and safety regulation, like minimum wage, all of these things are going to be up for grabs, irrespective of what's being said by the spokespersons for the economic zones and the free ports. The fact of the matter is They will be self-governing in their own way, right down to things like health and safety. And just to prove the point, 2 to 3 weeks ago, or just before the recess, Michael Gove pushed through the Westminster Parliament a bill allowing the compulsory purchase of any property, land, anything within the special economic zones and within the Freeports. And because it was Westminster, our papers barely carried it. But it applies exactly the same way in Scotland as it does in Teesside. So you could have a situation, and this has been mooted, that maybe in the ideological drive for private medicine to be given a proper home here in Scotland, maybe within the economic zones or potentially within the fourth Freeport, where we have the Freeport includes the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh and the biodevelopment quarter attached directly to it and the Children's Hospital. The potential for a compulsory purchase by a private medical company approved by the board of a Freeport is perfectly possible, and to some degree would make sense, particularly with regard to the so-called Green Freeport in Edinburgh, because the bio quarter, remembering that a big statement by the Scottish government some years ago was that one of our future industries would be in the areas of biomedicine and biomechanics. All of those are the things which are being dealt with at the biodiversity hub within the Freeport. That to me is worrying. And it's even more worrying that none of the elected representatives appears to have put 2 and 2 together, particularly those who are at Westminster, who know that the compulsory purchase order was on the order paper and not one of them got up to speak about it. That's wrong.
It's the quality of people that we send. It's quite frightening. I mean, come back to that. I mean, if you just look at, I think everybody who watched this show knows my tipple is the old Gordon's gin. I can buy a litre here for €10. And back home, it's more than twice that price. That's how much you've been ripped off, people. Absolutely ripped off left, right and centre. We all agree in this programme anyway, that Freeports and these special enterprise zones are not great. How can we stop them? Can we stop them? And how do we do it?
Probably the only way to stop them is independence, to be honest. I think the policy is a Tory policy. It's been steamrollered through. Scottish governments working with it now as our local councils. So that's the problem. So the difference is they're such vast areas, especially the fourth one. It's such an incredibly vast area for a Freeport. That's virtually unknown. I've never really known such a vast area. And what's all that about? And I worry as well about import of labour too, because in this global free-for-all, what's to say these companies can't import labour, cheap labour from elsewhere? And therefore that marginalises the local community again. So the local community are an afterthought here. We're not really considered. We don't have any inputs to it. And that's another factor in colonialism. You're out of the game. You're a bystander. You're no more than a bystander. We're sitting here without any real control over our economy, our country, its future, its population, its trade. We've got no control over its resources. We've got no, and this is all relating back to sovereignty. Unless you reclaim your sovereignty, you're out of the game, and that's the colonial term. Is for a colonised. You are out of the game. You have no input to matters in war and peace. And Scotland's been dragged into 171 armed conflicts by the UK since the Union, 80 or so since the Second World War. Ireland's avoided half of them, since its independence. We're a naturally friendly people. We're a very pro-European country. People, we would be neutral in most of these things. And most of these armed conflicts were colonial events or decolonizations, where England, acting as Britain, the imperial power, was using its muscle around the globe as a corporate industrial kind of exploiter. Whether it's Palestine, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Scotland, Wales, it's just the same thing. You're out of the game. So Scots have to get real. The question is quite a simple one. Independence, the UN tell us, is decolonization. You know, the UN define it as decolonization, and self-determination is the way to overcome it and to become independent. So we should be using that vehicle. And that goes back to the issue I was saying, what is the SNP Scottish Government doing about independence? They should have a permanent representation down at the UN. They should be knocking on the doors saying, we're your next member state. Give us another referendum, give us anything, a vote or whatever. Let's have a decent franchise like New Caledonia that gets us independence. And the priority then is self-determination and push for independence for the people. And that is mainly the indigenous people who are suffering. Remember also that the other functions or characteristics of colonies is a low GDP. A low GDP per capita, and our GDP per capita is half of Denmark's, is about a third of Norway's. You know, it's about half of Greenland almost, and Faroe Islands. And there's Faroe Islands with direct ferries to the continent. We can't even have one. We're stopped from trading links. We're stopped from exploiting our own resources and using them. We have low wage levels. We've had historically higher levels of you know, early deaths. We've had more illnesses. We've had 8 times the out-migration of England in most parts of the last 2 centuries. You know, we've got all the characteristics: banishment of the natives, low GDP, low wages, high levels of unemployment traditionally. And as you know, Rodney, I was an economic migrant in the late 70s, early 90s when the economy collapsed, and we all went to building sites in Germany from Scotland. You know, these were the reality, and that was the first of 3 big recessions, and the deindustrialization followed, the collapse. This is another aspect of our reality, our colonial reality, is a very concentrated industrial situation. So we're focused on very narrow industrial areas. Historically, we have been shipbuilding, engineering, things like that, mostly to supply the core nation, mostly to supply the needs of empire. And once that collapsed, you were then exposed to all these shocks, industrial shocks. So Scotland's always been exposed to shocks, economic shocks. So we have all these structural weaknesses, mainly because we don't have sovereignty. We don't have control over our own affairs. All our big decisions are made for us elsewhere.
Well, now you told me about Germany. Well, you remember Auf Wiedersehen, Pet, so we'll have to call you Al Wiedersehen, Pet from now on. That'll be your new nickname in here. But one of the terrible thing about all of this, I mean, we've got 2 King's Councils I know who watch our shows, and so, doff my hat to them. Maybe you could come, one of you could tell me, or both of you could tell us, can we, post-independence, cancel any of these contracts? There's a new nation. Are we allowed to cancel these Freeports and SEZs without any problems? That'd be nice to know. It'd be lovely for the Scottish people to know. It is, Lloyd, to me, I mean, you hear that phrase neoliberalism on steroids, but to me, these Freeports and special enterprise zones are more like neoliberalism on crystal meth. It is really the most extreme of economies, is it not?
It is, but it's interesting to know that we have a Prime Minister whose economic guru is the guy who came up with these crazy ideas of Freeports and special economic zones. I can't remember his name at the moment, but he taught Sunak, and Sunak has become a devotee of the guy's economic concepts. But if I can just go back a little bit, you know, you spoke to Mr. Kerr, who's going to stand in Edinburgh East and Musselburgh at the next election. And the interesting thing about the Edinburgh East and Musselburgh constituency is the vast majority of it is in the Green Freeport, but the Musselburgh side of it is not in the Green Freeport. Will Mr. Kerr be able to say to the people in Musselburgh, I'm terribly sorry, all these beautiful, wonderful jobs that are available just the other side of the Esk within the Green Freeport, there's nothing I can do for you, you'll just have to suffer? I mean, effectively, you know, if what we're being told by the Freeport ideologues is that within the Freeport, it will be a land of milk and honey. It will be high value jobs, according to Douglas Chapman. It will be, you know, a real driver to our economy. What do we say to the people who live outside of those zones? Those zones that are, as I said, the land of milk and honey. What is it going to be outside of the zone? Is it going to be tumbleweed? Are wages going to be lower there? We have to address and take on the very issues of the governance of the Freeports in those areas where part of the country or part of the constituency or part of the council ward is within the Freeport and one part of it is not. Are we, do we need to now start making the argument that our own government is complicit in creating a situation of a two-tier employment structure in the country, where some people who live, according to them, in the land of milk and honey in the enterprise zones and the Freeports, they will be doing very well. What about everyone else? Where is the responsibility in our government to all the people who do not live within these areas? If they keep telling us that this is the future bounty, then they need to tell us what the plan is for the people who are not going to be living in these areas of bounty.
What I remember Councillor Brown saying to us was that, far from creating new jobs, what actually happened was employers who were outside the zones moved into the zones so they could drop salaries, didn't have to pay holiday pay or sick pay or give maternity, paternity leave, and they get, relief on capital gain, or any kind of taxes were. So, and the less the tax take, the less it's going to come back to the nation. So it really is quite a worry. Alf, if I could on you when you were talking about, we should go to the UN and see what we could do there. But this week, to slightly diverse, but I have a reason for it, is when the bombing of the Iranian embassy, which breaches the Vienna Convention, it's against international law. When the Iranians took it to the Security Council of the United Nations, the British, the French, and the Americans prevented it from being discussed because it didn't suit them. Now, what worries me is if we go where we have a right, where we have right on our side, as the Iranians had, because their embassy was bombed, that the British, the French, the Americans, or whatever, just go, be quiet, it's not happening. How can we get around that?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with any situation of independence is the people's understanding is quite often rudimentary. So it's because the National Party's never done, as Frantz Fanon called it, a reasoned study of colonial society. So the SNP don't think independence is decolonisation. They think it's something else. What exactly, I'm not sure. But, they tried to promise the earth to everybody to make them vote. But what I think is important is using all vehicles that we have. Okay, the UN's not perfect. We know that. We know it's not perfect. But it's one of the few mechanisms that would show our situation, would illustrate quite graphically that we are in a situation that people didn't really understand, a colonial situation, where we are being exploited. Now, for example, all the people who say Scotland isn't a colony because we've got a treaty, even although it's a violated, manket, corrupt treaty that's been breached so many times it's worthless. Like every colonised people, or most of them, were handed a violated treaty. We're no different. It's just another violated treaty. But so the lawyers grab a hold of this saying, yeah, we've got a treaty. So it's, we're sovereign and all the rest of it. But Parliament's sovereign, so how can we be sovereign? So there's a whole lot of questions there. But I think the UN issue is there. The self-determination mechanism is there. The decolonisation mechanism is there. Why are you not using it? Why are you not having somebody there? It's an effort to make the people understand their condition. Mm-hmm. And if the people didn't understand their condition, it's difficult to take them with you. The leaders are divorced for the people at the moment. That leadership in the SNP, the national movement, is divorced for the people. And you know why? It's because they ignore the people and they just manipulate the people. And we've got divide and rule and manipulate, and all Paulo Freire's definitions of oppression are at play. And the decolonisation and the post-colonial theory tell us all this as well. You've got the manipulation, you've got the divide and rule, you've got the complicit and compromised National Party going a different direction, taking the people up a blind alley, filling its pension pots. It becomes an implement of coercion. It introduces draconian and laws that oppress the people. It becomes an implement of coercion in that sense. It uses colonial forces to attack the movement. That's what it's been doing. It's all there ever since, the other Craig Murray, Alex Salmon, all the other attacks. That's what it's doing. It's a colonial administration. So you'd get the hypocrisy. It's contempt for the people. And that's how it deals with the people. So the people are divorced from that leadership. Therefore, what your independence movement has to do then is bring the people aboard and listen to them, listen to what they've got to say, speak to them in their language, their own language, speak to them the way they want to speak, know the way the colonizer tells them to speak in the schools and all that. So get it back to base, you know. Remember that colonialism is based on racism. It's about making a people subordinate, making their culture subordinate and imposing another culture that's superior. And of course, the elites all latch on to the superior culture, the superior language, the superior values. And this we get to the values issue as well, which people have raised recently. Humza raises values, Rishi Sunak raises his values, you know. But the reality in a colonial society is only the values of the oppressor are sovereign. Only the values of London, its flag, its one nation Britain, its United Kingdom, its monarchy, its pound, its poppies, everything about its symbols and its values. But we have to remember as well, in colonialism, there's no human values. Yeah. So colonialism at its root, according to the post-colonial theories, is just fascism. And that's about oppression of the minority over the majority. And that's what we see. The plunder of the country is taking money out, making people really, really rich. A few people around the world, whatever, where they come from, they're getting very wealthy. The people here are impoverished. Our poverty levels are probably going crazy. And well, half the people live in or close to poverty. Our infrastructure's ridiculously poor. There's Norway. 90% of the people are the new cars are electric. We're still at 10%. You know, that's a measure of an advanced economy that's rich. Norway's made everybody middle class. We've still got half of the people living in poverty or close to it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the difference. We're a less developed country compared to Norway, compared to Denmark, compared to Iceland, compared to the Faroes, even compared to Greenland. And now compared to Ireland as well. Look at their GDP too, although not perfect. But you know, we are losing out big time. But the reality of a colonial society, post-colonial theory tells you, is you ultimately perish. Your culture perishes. Your languages perish. Your way of doing things perish. Your ideals, your values disappear. And at the same time, of course, no sovereignty means you have no control over your territory. That includes your borders. You don't have any control over who's coming in. And then we've got the census that's not been revealed yet. And I'm hearing stories that the actual population of Scotland is over 6 million. That's why we're not getting told. That's why all our services are collapsed and people can't get dental appointments or hip replacements or anything. The NHS and everything else is geared towards a population of 5 million or less, probably. And here we've got a population of 6 million. Probably. And they're not telling us that. So, as I say, we're out of the game. We're just bystanders. We take what we get.
Yeah.
We do what we're told.
The important thing is, well, that's true, Lloyd. There's a lot of us, like the three people in this conversation just now, and a lot of people that we know and deal with, we don't accept it. We don't accept it. And it's our job, and everyone watching this show, is to take the message to the people. And it's to say to them, explain to them, if they don't think we're a colony, keep telling them. If we're being exploited, let them know we're not poor. We're not weak. We are maybe too stupid. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yep. There's no question that the central problem is we live in a polity that looks for leadership. That the people who go out and vote but who are not supremely engaged in politics have a belief that the leaders of the political parties, the leaders of the political ideologies, that they've done the work, that they've done they've made the effort, done the research, and they have a vision. And the greatest tragedy of all is it's the very opposite. We have a political class with no plan, no vision, and it would appear to me no real understanding of colonial theory or indeed of the nature of the relationship between the people of Scotland and the United Kingdom. The simple, straightforward facts are that until your national movement engages itself in the activity required to deliver its principal aim, which is the achievement of independence, then we're treading water. And at the moment, I don't see the debates within either the National Party on its own. I see a lot of the debates in the national movement. But can we get the Scottish National Party to sit down and admit that it has lost its way in this first 25 years of devolution, partly because it chose to enter 100% into that structure rather than entering that structure with one eye on the ultimate prize, which was independence. Thereby, you enter the structure to use the structure to achieve your aim. 25 years down the line, we had one attempt at changing the game under Alex Salmond's SNP leadership and came incredibly close. Subsequent to that, I think we've seen the fight removed deliberately, but also because we have a leadership of the party, not the movement, who lack imagination, who come from within a political bubble. It's beyond their ability to create that vision. And it's only when you present the vision of the future, like it's Scotland's oil campaign in the 70s and the 80s, somewhat truncated, but very successful, or that extraordinary year-long education process that happened on the run-up to September the 18th, 2014. When your national movement abandons the responsibility for maintaining that educational work, for maintaining the constant search for the pathway to achieve independence, then the people are left blind, effectively, because there is not, amongst the greatest number of people in our electorate, there is not an understanding that the Scottish National Party has de facto abandoned its campaign for independence. People don't understand that. They believe that the leaders of the parties are the guardians of the knowledge. And somehow we have to find a way. In some way, Prism does this. And Alf's marvellous book, Dún Hodden, is another example of how that change is beginning to happen. But I think we all grew up in the British politics of the Scottish National Party and the Scottish National Movement, where it was going to be one event. It was all going to happen instantly, as if by magic. And what we failed to do is what other national liberation movements have done, which is to recognise that you have on a day and daily basis have to be putting the structures in place to lead you to your goal, that you cannot depend entirely on the political timetable of effectively the oppressor to deliver what you have. We have not built, this is the 90th anniversary of the Scottish National Party, but it's not the 90th anniversary of the Scottish National Movement. It has a much, much longer history, but unfortunately, it is a dissipated history. It's a history that hasn't maintained itself, it hasn't maintained and created the structures to educate people in the concept of national liberation. There are people to learn from. We must get out of the idea that there's suddenly one day is going to come along. We have a responsibility to the next generation, and I know people hate people talking about independence might not happen for a generation, but we have a responsibility to those people to set the structures in place that will allow them to deliver if we can't deliver before then.
Indeed, we haven't had a good rebellion since the 19th century. Maybe it's time now, but it's time to get the people mobilised. The political parties have had their chance and they have blown it. They haven't done enough. That's why I support Indie First. And that's why I'll support anything of the people and the grassroots that will get us to independence. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this show. We've overrun as usual. Fortunately, we don't get charged for overrunning, but here we are. Alf, can I thank you, as always, for your fantastic input. Great to see you again. Yep, and as I say, from now on, you'll be known as Alf Wiedersehen, Baird. And Lloyd, again, great to see you, and I'll see you very, very soon. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, you and yours, take care till we see you again. Bye now.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.